Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to welcome back Grace Sammon. Grace, thank you so much for saying yes and being back on the show.
Jen, I couldn't be more pleased. Your podcast is one of my absolute favorites, so to be back is a real joy.
Oh, thank you so much. And when we chatted last, you had a debut book, The Eves, that came out. And we talked a lot about like the craft and the process of getting that book together and out into the world. And what have you done since then?
Well, that's been the amazing journey. As you might remember, The Eves is really about a woman who thinks she's done. And I thought I was done. My first three books were nonfiction. Then I decided to write the novel. And magically, I decided that I needed three more books, and they're all going back to my roots of nonfiction. So the first three books were in education, then the novel. And then, the theme of the book was being done. And I did one radio show. And I think it's so interesting how being a writer, you know this yourself from being a writer, it really transforms our own lives. And I did one radio show and someone said to me, you need to have a radio show of your own. And I thought, no, I'm done. So what happened was I did the radio show, created a show called The Storytellers, then realized how much I didn't know about launching a book, whether it was part of the writing process, which you are so skilled at with all the work that you do as a developmental editor and as a coach. But I realized I don't know a lot about some of the craft parts, the publishing parts, the marketing parts. So I started a second radio show to help authors to promote them and to also get them some direct marketing support with my colleague, Mary Helen Sheriff, who's the author marketing coach. And then I realized there are a lot of authors who didn't know what I didn't know. So I had this idea in June of 2022 to create a book series called Launchpad, the Countdown to Writing Your Book, Launchpad, the Countdown to Publishing Your Book, and Launchpad, the Countdown to Marketing Your Book. So that'll be 7 books under my belt, 3 books in under a year. And I just love them. So here's the first one. So I've been busy.
Yes, you have. So you have hit on a few things that I really am excited to dive into with this. And one of which is I'm hearing rapid launch. The other is that I'm recognizing that this is an anthology. So one of the things you were sharing about as we were talking ahead of this recording was the fact that the Launchpad with the craft, with the publishing, and with the marketing, it's an anthology. Each book is one. So it's not just rapid launching. It's also an anthology, rapid launching each time. How did you pull all that together? I feel like that's so a bit loaded to ask, but still, we'll unpack as we go.
We will.
Let's start here.
Well, first of all, I'm so honored that it's an anthology. I mean, my name is across the cover of 3 books with my co-conspirators, if you will. Emma DeHancey is a Scotland-based book coach. She works almost exclusively with first-time authors. Stephanie Larkin on the publishing book. She owns Red Penguin Books. And Mary Helen Sheriff, who I've already mentioned, is my co-conspirator, if you will, on the marketing book. And I am always, if I have a hallmark, Jen, I hope it's about creative collaboration. I believe that we are all so much better if we work together. You and I have worked together. I think that it's just, we lift each other up. So I thought, I don't know everything. I still don't. So let's create this anthology. Quite honestly, I thought it would be a lighter lift. I wanted to write the 3 books on writing, publishing, and marketing, but I thought it would be a much lighter lift if I had all these people. Luckily, everybody jumped on board right away. Between the 4 of us who had this idea together to create this series, we very quickly, I would say, we had the idea in June. I signed the book contract with Red Penguin Press at the end of July. And I think we had every collaborator in place by September.
Nice. So then how did you move through that in the sense of to your point about having collaborators, did you identify each collaborator because of the book focus, or was it, I know this person would be great because I've experienced them and I've experienced them in different ways. So finding out from them which way they might want to contribute, because maybe they might have exposure or a lot of experience in multiple facets of this trilogy?
I think it was a little bit of both. I would love to say that even though I've started multiple companies and now have these books, that I'm a very organized person. You and I have talked about the difference between plotters and pantsers. I am still very much a spaghetti against the wall kind of girl. So I would love to say that I had an outline for every single book. And then I went, who would be good to make that outline happen? I had ideas for what should be in the book, and then worked with the people that I've already named to say, where are the holes? Who would be really good at that? And there were some wonderful surprises to me because I don't know all of the authors personally. So I think one of the first chapters that came in was on grammar. And it was a and I thought about you right away. Emma said, we need a chapter on grammar. And I was like, oh, come on, these are all authors. It's one of the most fascinating chapters I ever read. Stacy Juba does a great job. It is fun. It is funny. It is helpful. It talks about style. And I make a lot fewer errors, if you will, with my serial and Oxford commas and my M dashes, etc. So part of it was spaghetti against the wall. Part of it was where the holes are. In each of the books, they're between 14 and 18 authors. I think only 2 of them are repeated.
Cool. So thinking about putting a book together like this, you've got the idea, you have essentially a form of an arc, because really, the book 1 has a starting point of, we have to have something written, then we are going to get said something into a book that's published, and then we're going to take this book that has been published and share it further into the world. So it's its own arc. Was each book itself constructed in the context of an arc, and from that way of saying the reader is starting and then they're going to read through? Or was it almost in the mindset of like a handbook where I could, if I'm stuck on a particular section like grammar, I can just pick that section up and I can read that and get back to what I'm doing? Or like, how did you envision your user really playing with that?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, I'm very proud that every single chapter ends with a countdown. So there's a top 10 countdown to grammar. There's a top 10 countdown to plotters, pantsers, and puzzlers. There's a top 10 countdown. Every author, that was pretty much the only restriction with our authors. We said 3,000 to 5,000 words per chapter. Please feel free to embed your personal experience within that chapter. So by the time we get up to book 3 and we have people who are PR coaches, we have them talk about how they like to work with clients. But every single chapter ends with that top 10, and we ask them to do that. And those are lead magnets. So people who were just interested in not necessarily the book can still go and get the lead magnets in those top 10. There are also additional tools at the end that you can get to the website from and get those if you've purchased the book. But in terms of your specific question, we very much wanted each chapter to stand alone, because writing is an iterative process. You could be totally stuck on, I'm ready to publish my book. Do I want to go hybrid? Do I want to go whatever? And so you could just go and read a chapter and do that and still pick up some tips. And actually it was hard because with the writing process being so iterative and knowing what we know about marketing, there are certain marketing things that should be happening while you're writing. There are certain things that you should be looking forward to in terms of getting a publisher as you're writing. As you're marketing one book, you may be writing a second or a third book. So there were times where it was hard to say this only belongs in book 1, or this only belongs here. We definitely had some challenges. Book 1 on writing ends very much with a fabulous chapter by Jen Eyre Trump, where she very much arcs us right into, okay, now what are we going to do about publishing? And then we move into publishing, and we've got the idea of, are we going to self-publish? Are we going to work with an agent? And as you well know, we may think we're done when we type the end, but there's so much more editing that happens in the publishing process. We talk a lot about editing in the publishing process, where I was like, I thought we had covered that. So it was hard to keep everything within one book.
How did you keep all the parts moving together smoothly? Like the idea of herding cats, that phrase goes so beautifully here. And I mean this most lovingly, but this is a big project to undertake, an anthology in and of itself, with various people contributing. They're writing, they have deadlines, yes, and things come up in everyone's life. And you're also trying to do, essentially a rapid launch or an iterative launch where you have one book and then the next one's coming right on top of it. So all of them are in different stages. How did you keep all of it together?
I don't know. To be candid, it was a much bigger task. Not undoable, obviously. The second book is out. The third book comes out in June. So I was very, very lucky. Emma, Mary, and I worked exceptionally well together. And Stephanie Larkin, who owns Red Penguin, was incredibly patient with us because none of us knew the back of the publishing house well. So Stephanie would send us something and we would go, well, we could do it this way or we could do it that way, because we're all a little bit of type A's. And she was very, very patient with our learning curve. And we set, I think, reasonable guidelines. 3,000 to 5,000 words on a specific topic is not horrible for a writer to put out. If we had them in place by September, the heaviest lift was book one, because those people had their chapters due fast, and we had to edit them fast and turn them around fast and decide on cover art. The process for me of learning all of the back of the house things, as if I was also the publisher, was both daunting and exciting. So to have the opportunity to give great feedback on the cover and say, well, could we use these colors? I didn't like the way the spines looked. And I was imagining Zibby Owens, who actually, she owns Zibby Books and Zibby Media, and she gives a prize out for the best spine on a book. So I was like, no, our spines really need to look good. I don't know if I'll ever win a Zibby, but it was that attention to detail and the editing process. I have a whole new appreciation for editing on all ends of the spectrum, whether it's developmental or not. I also have a great appreciation for the sensitivity. When we got into book two, which I think may have been the hardest one to write on publishing, it was hardest because, you may like an Oxford comma versus a serial comma, but, we could decide on a style manual. When we get into publishing, there are people who feel adamantly that, the agented way is the only way to go. There are people who feel adamantly that hybrid presses are really vanity presses. They charge too much money, and there's only one path. And we were able, and this is something I'm very proud of in that book, we were able to strike a balance between everybody who literally still goes to their copying machine and makes a book that they've somehow made available, to how to find an agent. And the authors were very sensitive and responsible. If I said, if you're going to be calling a very credible company a vanity press, I want to say, can't we just call it a hybrid? And can you talk about your feelings about working with hybrids without using different kinds of language? Every single author said, of course, I respect all publishing. This is my experience and this is what I believe in. But absolutely. So that was a real joy to be able to find a balance in those tones. So keeping those pieces together and working with authors in that way. And then the marketing book is just, it's done. I read my final galleys last night. And we talk about everything from branding, which I never thought about as a novelist. I just didn't. So everything from branding to being a good citizen. What does social media mean? Just some of the things, how to work with book clubs, giveaways, whether you go Kindle Unlimited or whether you want to go wide, things I didn't know about and give me great thought. So keeping the pieces in the air was a lot. Promoing them at the same time was a lot. But ultimately, I couldn't be prouder. And I can say that because I certainly learned a lot, which is something I always love. But to be able to pull a collaboration together like this and to get to talk about it is really a joy.
What I hear that you created were guardrails in a sense of saying, here, we have a lot of room to work with, but one one expectation, what set of ground rules is we need to be able to, there's a difference between saying this isn't really good versus saying my experience with this isn't good, or my experience with this is wonderful versus saying, broad stroke, this is the most wonderful thing ever. It sounds like there was some ground rules that were established and not just respected, but they were, if you needed to hold accountable, just to enforce, to say, hey, we need to really restructure this, that you were willing to, but it sounds like you had people who were receptive to that. And I think that that's a really important piece within anthology of, here's how we're going to play, like here are the terms that we're going to work with in order to create this collaborative book for us. So when this book was put together, so book one is coming to fruition and you're seeing it, when you were going through, when this book itself is getting edited, while recognizing you have multiple people, so multiple authors contributing, did you have one editor go through the entire book looking for, and did you provide certain guidelines of saying, I don't want to lose voice? I realize technically you would have a book with one voice, but we don't want one voice in this case. Did you have certain parameters or guidelines that you worked with on an editor for the books?
The team of 4 had so many discussions about editing. And I think we all had various point of views of our own. Stephanie Larkin, the publisher, and therefore the final word, even though incredibly collaborative, the final word on style, if you would, was very clear. She did not want to go on a style manual on this. We had authors from the UK, and so their spelling on certain words was not American spelling. They would lovely say the word whilst you are writing, whilst you are doing this. Also, there's very subtle grammatical differences that are used. So I was very much, I wanted a style manual because to me, when I was editing, I found it distracting because I had this laser-like focus of, wait, they used an M dash differently than we did. So where we wound up in book 1, and in truth, I'll be very candid as I always am, I wish we had more time editing book 1. But the magic of how things are published today is after book 3 comes out, I can go back and edit it and we can change the files. But I do wish we had more time in editing book 1 because it launched and I think ARCs were due the next day for book 2. So we each edited, we each raised comments. For book 1, we definitely did not have a style manual. By book 3, I would say we were pretty much in a style manual, not exclusively. I think that's a fair statement.
But what I'm hearing again is recognizing that we might need to have another ground rule here to talk through. And so even if not all of them were identified at the beginning of the project, to say, okay, how might we embark upon this, laying everything out? It also sounds like there was the fluidity, embracing the pantser element, if you will, of saying, okay, hey, we're working through this. Something's come up. Can we talk about this and collaborate and come to a ground rule that all of us can get on board with? And that's what I hear this whole process was for you, for the 3 that you also worked with, but also how that permeated with the individual contributing writers for each of the chapters, because it wasn't just you all being on the same page. It was also that message being communicated with all the other team members who were part of bringing the books to life.
And I think you're really insightful in that, and also on your guardrail comment. I really like that. I will use that as I continue to talk about the books. But I really felt it was to provide a launch pad for writers. I wanted them to get that on-ramp so that they could jump on at any place. They could take off, just to continue that imagery, that they could take off at any place. But it was really about the joy of learning to write. We have a chapter in the publishing book by a woman named Natalie Abando, and she wrote a chapter on working with the BIPOC authors, the Black, Indigenous, people of color. And, even though my family is multicolored, my personal family is multicolored, I had not heard the word BIPOC at the start of this process. And I had to hop on the phone with Natalie and say, I want this chapter in here, but I need some education, but I don't want you to educate me, but I need, so that was a fascinating chapter to edit because of what I had to learn, but also how I had to learn it. So I hope that we cut bases on so many things.
I love that, because it sounds like that's what this whole process was. As the book came together, as pieces were coming together, it almost seems like there were little indicators that said, okay, do we have everything? All right, now let's read through this to make sure that the end vision is being met, because book 2 has its own vision and still supporting the bigger picture. Book 3 has its own vision and supporting the bigger picture. So they each book unto itself has its own goal, has its own premise, something to accomplish, if you will, but still honoring the space of it being a trilogy, a series. And what I'm hearing too is that not just that those guardrails, those rules moving through each book as you learned, but also the willingness to kind of reverse engineer, look back a little bit to say, oh, wait, I know we're here on book 2, but I've learned something that might, can I weave this in at the right spot on book 1 still, or how far forward can I put this in book 3? Like, I kind of see a little bit of that dancing.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. There's a chapter in book 1 called Plotters, Pantsers, and Puzzlers, because I'm neither a plotter nor a pantser. And what I learned in book 1 was that term puzzlers, which I just thought was a wonderful piece by Louis Georgestadt. I'm much more a puzzler. I like asking the question, and I'm going to plot around a little bit, but I'm going to puzzle a whole lot. And so, yeah, I think that you're right. And, we have a foreword in each book. The foreword in book 1 is by the fabulous Amy Ferris, who's an amazing screenwriter, but she also wrote the off-Broadway play about marrying George Clooney. Zibby Owens, who I mentioned, did the foreword in book 2. And Dan Blank wrote the foreword for book 3. So there's a foreword in every book. There's these downloads in every book. James River Writers, which is out of Virginia, endorsed book 3. So I'm super excited about that as well. So we cover, in book 3, we cover newsletters, giveaways, networking, promotions. I don't think we got it all, but I hope we got close to help every author be able to take off.
So you mentioned something there that I think is interesting, because I don't know if all authors have thought of this for their book, not just the foreword. They've thought about a foreword, but the endorsement. How did you go about securing an endorsement, and why did you feel an endorsement was appropriate?
For several reasons. The first reason was, quite honestly, a marketing one. There were several associations that I belonged to, or that some of our contributors belonged to. And I thought, boy, and I'm not a great marketer, but I thought, boy, if association X, Y, or Z endorsed it, that's a ready market, right? So if the Association of Grace Sammon Writers decides to endorse the book and they send that out to their members, then I have a ready marketing base. So for book 3, quite honestly, we had the time to do it. We didn't have the time. We approached several organizations, but organizations have boards, and they have board meetings, and they have scheduled board meetings. And then they want to see the book, and they want to see whether it's endorsable. So I think that the idea was the right idea from the marketing standpoint. the time in terms of this rapid launch, it really only allowed doing it for book 3. We've talked about going back as we re-edit or maybe even add to the tools that people can download from the book and think about endorsements. But again, it's that creative collaboration that I just, it's my hallmark, I hope.
I love that. I love that so much because it really feels like, to your point earlier about when you're learning and you're working through it, more things come up that spark your curiosity, that you realize, how might I incorporate this? Oh, wait, can I incorporate it on this book? Maybe not here due to whatever the timing is, or, even appropriateness of it. But then how might I do this on the next book? Where can it fit in so that it doesn't feel like a rush? But then I understand, if I want to make this happen, then I need to have, A, B, and C in place so I can do that. So what I really hear, like, as more pieces come in, that you were looking at it and having to go, okay, now where does this fit? What does this mean? And a lot of those kinds of questions coming up.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think also that, it speaks to that rapid launch. And we had meetings with multiple different groups, but the process of that board meeting, board vote, constituency was the thing that really slowed down the endorsement process. But then when you get an endorsement, then that affects the book cover. So as recently as yesterday, I was editing the back book cover for book 3 because it said, endorsed by James Rivers Writers, but I didn't like the way it said it. I wanted it to look more like a seal of approval. I wanted it to say it in the body of the text in the back. And luckily we're able to do that because of how we publish today.
I love that point. That is such a great point, because you're right that you get new information. You're like, oh, wait, now what do I do with, how do I incorporate this? Because you are excited about it. And it is something that is really cool to share. And whomever it was that you worked with, whether it's an award that you received or an endorsement or what have you, you want to honor that space too. So I love that you mentioned that. That is really, really cool. Grace, this is so cool. I am excited for you. I think that just the idea of pulling together one anthology, but yet 3 in a rapid launch. I mean, go mama. That's amazing. So
well, it's a launch pad.
See? Where can people connect with you? Where can they get these books? I mean, just that's awesome.
Jen, you're absolutely fabulous. I love spending time with you. People can go to the radio show's website, which is launchpadradio.com. They can see all the radio episodes that really inspired this book, but also they can see how to order the book. It's available everywhere. I always, Amazon sells 80% of all books, so that's the easy place, but it is available in bookstores everywhere, in ebook and in paperback.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Grace.
Thank you, Jen.